The Israel-Iran war has expanded beyond both countries to draw in at least 6 other countries as Iran, in its retaliation against US-Israel strikes, hits out at Dubai, Doha, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and even Oman. In all of these cities, dramatic and shocking images have emerged as airports, luxury hotels, and even crowded residential colonies have seen fires like the one you see on your screen as countries scramble to intercept missiles and drones that Iran seems to be sending into countries where the aim seems to be clear: to put pressure on the American administration, the Trump led American government, to come back perhaps to the negotiating table. The last few hours have been dramatic. Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, has been killed in those joint strikes, and this has been Iran's counter. The images you see on your screen are in some ways unbelievable. From the Burj in Dubai to the runway of its airport, the port in Oman to ships on the sea, hotels in Bahrain to the airport in Kuwait, missiles and drones from Iran vowing revenge. And Trump is hitting back, saying that Iran will be hit again with a force that it has never seen before. The 6 Gulf countries I mentioned have now been embroiled directly. But in Pakistan, there are reports that 10 protesters protesting in support of Iran who tried to storm the US consulate in Karachi were killed in police firing. The fire of this war is spreading far and wide. The Iranians seem to be calculating that this kind of targeting or counter retaliation aimed at global commerce, trade, and aviation will bring the Americans to the negotiating table. But in Israel, they are talking about this being, quote unquote, the last war with Iran. Where is the world headed? I have 3 very distinguished experts on the program today. Let me bring them up now as we look at all dimensions of this conflict. I first want to introduce Ambassador Yash Sinha. He's a veteran Indian diplomat, but something that is, I think, important to know in this context is that Ambassador Sinha has served in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. He has been to Iran 7 times, and he has met with Ayatollah Khamenei twice, the same Khamenei who has now been eliminated. So I think he has a very special perspective on this program. I also want to welcome to the program somebody who has been the former deputy director of the Israel NSC, Colonel Itamar Yar. He has fought on the insides of the Israeli security establishment. And thank you, sir, for your time today. And also joining us is military veteran General Rakesh Sharma. General Sharma, of course, is a military veteran and a distinguished fellow at the Vivekanand Foundation. Thank you very much, everybody. Colonel Itamar Yar, let me start with you. When we were setting up for the program, I heard air raid sirens go off behind you. That is not uncommon in Israel. All of you in Israel are used to it. But Iran seems to be, more than Israel, now targeting other parts of what we call West Asia and, America calls the Middle East. Can you tell us what is the situation first on the ground in Israel, where you are?
We are in war, but the Israeli civilians are affected mainly by sirens. Until now, in the last a day and a half, only 2 missiles had found the ground. All the others were stopped in the air by the anti-missiles and anti-aircraft systems that are very, very sophisticated and successful. But of course, life in Israel today and yesterday are not as usual. Most people don't go, I would say that something about 50% only of the businesses are open. Schools are not running. So this situation can't go for many, many days. But I'm sure that we'll speak about what are the expectations for the future later.
Just one more question to you. What do you make of the fact that Clearly, Iran does not have the military capacity to take your military on, to take on the Americans. So it seems to have chosen a strategy, and that strategy is to hit out at global trade, aviation, commerce. It's hitting out at cities like Dubai, where there are not even any American bases. The UAE has remained fiercely away from all of these immediate geopolitical tensions because it's focused so much on just the business of being Dubai. Iran's strategy seems to be to maybe make somebody like Trump take a step back as airports, hotels, aviation all become vulnerable. What do you make of this, Colonel?
I'll have 2 points. First of all, the damage from the Iranian attacks on all these countries, and you didn't include Jordan, and the two missiles had targeted Syria even. The damage are very, very limited because most of these countries have very successful and very successful and sophisticated systems that stopped all of these. We need to take by consideration that with all the respect to what the Iranian are doing and sending these days, there are very, very limited numbers because their capability is very low based on the Israeli attacks and the American attacks a few months ago already, and what had happened in the opening minutes of this war yesterday morning. So they try to send from time to time 1 or 2 or 3 missiles or drones or other elements, but their capacities are very, very limited. I think, but it's my view, of course, that the fact that they decided to attack the Gulf states, it's a huge mistake because these Gulf states tried to convince the Americans until now not to open war against Iran, not because they want to defend Iran, but because they understood that it will have influence on their economy, on their life. And what Iran have done lately is to convince these countries to support the Americans to hit Iran much, much more than they have done until now, not only as some kind of retaliation, but because they understood that the Iranians don't have any red lines. There is a big question who is taking the decisions in these days in Iran after the yesterday morning. I assume that what we saw until now, at least, is only some kind of automatic response that the decisions about them were taken before the attack, and what will be the real Iranian situation we'll see in the near future. I would say that my expectation, if I know the Iranians' behavior, is that they will try to use this kind of missiles and drones, but I think that the major element will come by attacks on civilian Israeli and American and perhaps some Gulf states positions, including embassies, in fact, in many, many places in the world, and it will be much easier for them to do it.
Okay, let's open this up. Ambassador Sinha, I want to bring you in. The videos and the images out of these Gulf countries are really, truly shocking. We have Colonel Itamar saying it's a big mistake. But if you look at some of these videos, you have an oil tanker off the coast of Oman. This is the first ever attack by Iran on any sort of target in Oman. So that tells you what a different situation we're in. We have a Fairmont hotel in Dubai, which we also last night. There are images of a luxury hotel, the Crown Plaza in Manama in Bahrain. There is the airport in Dubai, sections of it had to be evacuated, the airport in Kuwait. So this is really a fire that is spreading across these Gulf countries. Now, given your experience, you've met with Khamenei twice, you were in charge of the Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran desk for 4 years in the government. You have served in 3 of these cities in this area. I want you to bring all that experience and tell us what is happening and what you think might happen next.
Barkha, thank you for having me on your show. 3 quick points initially. First, the decapitation strikes were very effective. They have taken out the top rung, most of the top rung of the Iranian leadership. However, they have not completely decapitated the leadership. They had planned for an eventuality, and the reports, I'm not sure they're confirmed, that Ayatollah Ali Arafi has been declared as the interim supreme leader. Now, obviously, there's a three-member council that chooses the leader. I'm not sure whether this council had chosen Ayatollah Arafi or whether it's a confirmed report or not. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot eliminate completely the regime through aerial bombings. You can decapitate the leadership, but to throw them lock, stock, and barrel, you would need to do much more. Number one. Number two, I agree with Colonel Itmar Yar that the damage that has been caused till now, at least, and I can speak for UAE only because I'm in touch with people from Dubai and Abu Dhabi, has been minimal. In fact, the UAE, I know, has a very layered defense, and they are able, in fact, most of the incoming projectiles, whether they're drones or missiles, have been shot. And the debris sometimes that falls causes panic. Naturally, it would in civilian areas. And Iran obviously doesn't have the sort of precision guided missiles and drones that Israel and the US have. So they're hitting indiscriminately. You mentioned Oman. Now, Oman has been a friendly country with Iran. They have brokered peace talks, not only now, but in the past also. I recall dealing with Oman when we were trying to buy Iranian oil also. So it's very surprising that the Iranian, whatever's left of their leadership, is flaying out like that. Second point is, third point actually. The third point is you see what is happening in Pakistan. You mentioned the attack on the US consulate and 10 people being shot or killed by the US Marines. Obviously, if there is security, how did that happen? It's at peace with what Pakistan does, their duplicity. They run with the hare and hunt with the hound. So while they would let rioters loose and not bother too much about protecting important targets, and yet they will pretend to be the best friends. The so-called field marshal is the favorite field marshal of the White House. So, I mean, the duplicity is stark. So, I mean, because I've served in Islamabad also, so I know how the thing works. And I think time will tell how far this war will go, because if it's not resolved in a week, if there isn't a complete regime change in a week, and I don't think that is going to be possible, at least not with aerial attacks alone, I don't think you're going to have a complete regime change. You will have remnants of the, Basij, the IRGC, etc., taking control, which could be very dangerous, because then you would have splintering of command. And, when you have targets being selected indiscriminately and whatever firepower you have left, you hit. So then there can be collateral damage. So you have to be very careful there.
So you've put in a lot there, and I'll come to Pakistan maybe just a little separately, because I'll start by talking about whether a regime change, and you've said the regime change doesn't come in a week. As a military man, we have two military men here, one from Israel, one from India. Let me come to General Sharma. Can you change governments from the skies? I understand that the nature of warfare has changed. When I look at the missiles and drones coming into the Gulf countries, it reminds me very much of what we went through in Operation Sindoor. But we went through it for 4 days, and then the conflict was halted. The reason I ask this is I agree with both Colonel Itamar and Ambassador Sinha that the damage is not major, but we have to remember that Israel is used to, Colonel Yar didn't even flinch when the air raid sirens were going behind him. They're that used to it. We in India are battle hardened. We have seen years and decades of terrorism. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the closest they come to war is to see a movie in a cinema hall. They're not used to this. They really are not used to this. So that's psychological panic. The aim to close down airports, close down aviation. Obviously, the goal is maybe the Americans will step back. Do you believe regime change is possible without boots on the ground, General Sharma?
Thank you, Barkha, for inviting me. I think first outset, I should say that nobody should get used to wars. It's not a good idea to get used to wars and get battle hardened. But that apart.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So I also, taking cue from Ambassador Sinha, will make 3 points. One, uh, obviously the Israeli air defense is very good, superb, as Colonel Yar was saying, and it is not easy to pierce through by the missile being used. In June last year, the Israelis did manage, sorry, Iranians did manage to get one or two targets in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, but it is not very simple to do so. And Iran will also understand that it is a weaker regime. It doesn't have the power to contest Americans and Israelis together. No other nations in the world also cannot contest the firepower of Americans and of Israelis together. So they are such so potent. They are decades ahead of any other power. So what would a country which has been hands tied to the back would do? They would take on the easier targets which are possible to be done, where it is possible to hit and get some success, to get the weaknesses of the adversaries and not on the strengths. The strength of the adversaries is hitting at the American fleet or Israel, which they know that their missiles will not be able to pierce through. So it is easier to hit areas where there is insufficient air defense cover of this kind. Saudis have a THAAD, Saudis have a Patriot batteries, but this doesn't exist at that level with the Gulf countries. That's why they tried yesterday. At least it was all the air bases and the ports and the logistic bases of the Americans in the Gulf. Today they have expanded it across to civilian areas, or yesterday night they expanded it. These are weaker targets in comparison to hitting Israel or the Gulf assets of the Americans, and therefore they are reaping some kind of success in this game. That's a major point as to how asymmetric warfare is fought, where weaker countries have to find stronger nation. They look at weakest spots to be hit, and that is what Iran is attempting to do, and not wanting to hit Israel. That's a very and this is how Taliban did against the United States, or the
Yeah.
Vietnam did against the United States.
But sir, it worked. It
So
worked.
so it happens. The thing is that it happens. This is the way weaker nations plan to fight asymmetric wars. That's one point. Second is, like, one could say that in Yugoslavia and Kosovo air campaign, there was possible the governments changed at that time. But if we read into Iran, of course, Kanyar and Israelis are the most knowledgeable on the score. I personally, in my readings, had come across that the establishment in Iran had created very many layers of governance, right from provinces and districts up to the top. They had a systemic established across there. That systemic stated that if the Ayatollah had lost his right hand in a blast in 80s, Ayatollah, who now no more, had a prostate cancer in about 10 years ago. So he was already suffering. He's 87 years old. How long could he have survived? Would he have not given a thought of his what happens in the regime changes? He was not going. He's a cancer survivor. He wouldn't have lived for too long. My good guess is that the three-man team which was made in the morning to select a next gentleman, and then now, of course, they're talking about Arafi, their thought has been given. So 5 and 6 names were already out in the open. The point here is that regime implies what? The supreme leader has to be a cleric. He has to be a religious head. He also has to be an administrator, a Republican fellow, somebody who's experienced in governance. These two things have to match together. That doesn't come across to the grandchildren of the Khamenei, the previous gentleman, or his own. So they would find a methodology to achieve it. One of the names was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, which is also a kind of Ayatollah. He leads the prayers in Qom. He also takes on governance issues. He was national security. So the second tier has already been pre-decided, I would say. This three-man team, either Arafi becomes permanent subsequently, or one of the other 5, the names which are around, would be one selected who take it on, and he becomes a supreme commander. Whether he'll be a moderate fellow or he'll be as hardliner as the present government, you can't tell, because that's a futuristic thing. I have a third point, and I'll finish up. Any war which is started yesterday morning starts with the Americans having said, President Trump having said 100 times, I hate long wars. He's been saying this in campaign. He's been saying it in times of Afghanistan. He's been saying it subsequently last 1 year. So have there has to be a kind of thought process given to what's the end state. When do they want to say, okay, the war would succeed? How long can you deny Hormuz being closed? How long can you deny the oil exporting countries which depend so much on oil not exporting,
Yeah.
or Chinese and all? So there is an issue here, and what is the end state? And my last bit, Barkha, I get a feeling, you mentioned Op Sindoor, so my hackles were raised. I get a feel now that the Chinese, which have done exercises last week, Chinese Navy did exercises with the Iranian Navy last week in the Gulf here. So what have they done? I think many of these drones being sent across there are supported by Chinese satellite system Beidou. So they are not jammable by the Americans and by anybody else. Because similarly, the Pakistanis also did the same. Only in the last 15, 20 kilometers that the Beidou switches off, and then it goes and hits the target on its own guidance. So the guidance is poor, but actually these drones, which are just say $20,000 drones, are now a potent force with the Iranians have unveiled, which are not jammable, and they can only be downed by firing a $2 million missile. There is a disparity here coming up into what the Americans will throw against the Gulf states and what the Iran is throwing and what technology they are using.
Okay, that's very interestingly explained. And let me pick this point about Trump not wanting a long war and take it to Colonel Itamar Yar. Do you think that Israel is in for a long war, or do you think this is going to be a limited war? Question one. Question two, and it may not be you may not be able to give a definitive answer to this question. But question two is, what is the end goal? Trump very clearly said that it was regime change, it was the ouster of the Khamenei government, and it was time for the people of Iran to take control of their own government, those who've been on the streets protesting against this regime. But with Khamenei gone and a new leadership council in place, which may offer themselves to be more moderate voices, is that an acceptable end or not quite? Colonel.
First of all, I fully agree with those, my two colleagues that more or less said that there is no way to change their regime from the air. There are some exceptions, but this is the general idea. I think that the expectations, at least in the US and in Israel in general, is that we don't change the regime. We can't change the regime, not us and not the Americans. What we need to do is to make sure that we will organize the field for the Iranian people to do it. Now, this support have some kind of methods or ideas. The Iranian people on the ground have done quite a lot in the last few months, but they asked and they offered by President Trump support. And what the American and the Israeli attacks are doing now are doing two things. In one hand, we target the regime capacities to hit neighbors and to hit the Iranian people themselves. Because when the regime is dealing with surviving, is less dealing with trying to stop the people on the streets of Iran. And in this way, you encourage, in one hand, the people of Iran, and you try to help them by limiting the capabilities of the regime. Now, I don't think, and I think that we can see already based on the previous experience of regime change in Iran. Even when Khomeini had come to Iran, he came after many, many months where within Iran there was some kind of groups that organized the ground already. He came to something that was organized in a way already. And even on that situation, it took, those of us that are old enough to remember it took many months until there was really a regime change. In the beginning, there was another government, not the Shah government, another government, but it was not a Khomeini government. There was some kind of a transition period. And I think that this is what we will see in the coming weeks or months, hoping that what was done and will be done during the war itself will help it to go ahead. Now, I would like to say another thing about the time limits. Look, those of us that hear carefully President Trump, and it's, let's be frank, it's very difficult because he says many things, different things, many of them at the same day. But the main idea that he liked to mention more than once is to show that he is much more successful on leading the American interest, more successful than President Obama, not to speak about President Biden. He got it already. What he have done, what was done in the last something about 30 hours already, he can come out and say, I have done my job.
Correct.
Now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Brings me to the question, how long will this operation or war will exist? I think that the Americans have limited time. We need to remember there are elections in the US in November.
Yes.
And
yes.
we know now that most of the American public now, not to speak about the American representatives on the Hill, the two houses, most of them are against the war. And it is against what Trump brought to the American public as well. So President Trump doesn't want to go further with this operation close to the elections. So it's another motivation to him to make it short as possible. Now, if we can't change the whole regime in 2 weeks, and based on what I just said, I think that the whole operation will take something about days until the end of this week, perhaps going into the next week. And the men that will decide when this operation, the American and the Israeli operation, will stop will be President Trump based on that. The Israelis until then will do whatever we or the military and the other security organizations will do the best to try to hit Iran as serious as possible, to make sure that if they will want to go on with some of these ideas, mainly to destroy and to bring the end of the state of Israel, it will be something that they will understand that the cost is a bit too higher compared to what they can allow themselves.
Understood. And I think you made a very interesting point that Ambassador Sinha, Trump could technically say he got the guy at the top of, Iran's leadership, along with several significant leaders. Iran has been defanged. His job is done. Maybe he won't say this immediately. Right now, he's talking about hitting Iran back with an even greater force if the explosions in the Gulf countries don't stop. I want to just pick up a question from our audience stream. Prasad says, Iran is a huge gamble of Trump to change the domestic Epstein news cycle. If Iran descends into chaos and America gets blamed for it, this could further backfire on him. Do you think this is high risk? You mentioned a week's time. All of you seem to think this week is going to be critical. If this drags on, then Trump might even lose the achievement or the high that he's probably sitting on right now. Because at some point, the world wants to get back to being able to fly, to be able to do trade, for oil prices not to shoot up. How do you see it?
Barkha, I think we must remember that Iran is not Venezuela. So when you sort of pick up Nicolas Maduro and then you have a Delcy Rodriguez ruling Venezuela, there is no Delcy Rodriguez, as far as I know, in Iran who can step up and do a deal with the US, or at least have some sort of frozen peace or whatever. But Iran is a far more complex country. The ruling elite or the class or the theocracy that rules is deeply embedded. There are vested interests in the country. There's a great opposition. A ruthless regime brutally suppressed its own people. We are all aware of that. But there is a counter protest by people who have a vested interest in the continuation. So you see demonstrations, death to America, etc., happening right now in Iran. So it's not going to be easy. They don't have a Delcy Rodriguez. And also, I think Colonel Itmar made a point about the Shah being toppled. I recall I was doing my master's preparing for the UPSC when that happened, and you had a President Sayyid Abul Hassan Bani Sadr who ruled in the interim before Khomeini came and took charge. Now, will there be some sort of person like Bani Sadr? But Bani Sadr, don't forget, was opposed to the Shah. So I'm not sure whether you can have that sort of arrangement right now. Yeah, a week's a long time in war, and I don't know what sort of further strikes that will decapitate the top, second, maybe third layer of the ruling class and the besieged militia and the IRGC. But I think it's going to be difficult. And I don't think President Trump can claim victory just by eliminating Khamenei, because there is a reaction, and you're seeing the reaction happen in not only in the Islamic world but elsewhere also. In the U.S. Congress, there is tremendous disquiet, and there is disquiet all over. Because look at India. We obviously have taken a very measured stand, but we have 10 million of our compatriots in the Gulf, in the Middle East. And can you imagine if indiscriminate attacks by Iran results in casualties? It's going to harden opinion in India and elsewhere in the world. So I think it's, in my opinion, what has been undertaken is a reckless action without really realizing what the end game is going to be. And if you don't know the end game, then how are you going to institute regime change?
So talk just a little bit more about the reckless action. You are saying that this is reckless and therefore Trump at this moment can't claim victory. It isn't going to be easy to do regime change. The Americans don't have the appetite for a long war. So therefore what? What happens next?
There'll be chaos, because you see, the problem is if you kill the top rung of the leadership, then you have these fringe elements taking over. Imagine missiles and whatever they have left in their armory after the bombings are over falls into the wrong hands. Then you can have the sort of indiscriminate sort of firing, killings, targeting, etc. Iran is already doing that. You can see they don't have precise weaponry, it appears. So they are targeting any and everything that they can hit. Civilians be collateral damage. So that's dangerous. That's why I call it reckless. I'm not in any way defending the regime there, because we are aware of the brutal nature of that regime, and I'm acutely aware of their actions, not only now when the thousands of protesters have been killed, but even in the past, you've had protests brutally suppressed. But the problem is, when you try and undertake a regime change, you have to look at other factors too. Look at the region, how volatile the region is. You mentioned petroleum supplies. Can you imagine if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, if some refineries are hit in Saudi Arabia or wherever, the sort of impact it will have not just on India, but the entire globe. So that is why I deem it reckless, not because I don't support it or I support it, but it's not, I don't want to pass value judgments here. Of course, it's a flagrant violation of international law, but then we've become quite used to that. But the problem is the consequences. And I don't think people have thought through the consequences so far.
Okay, that's a grim picture, which means that, I've been saying this is not the Israel-Iran war. This is a big war. It can become a global war, General Sharma. We've already seen Russia and China issue statements. You've been talking about China and the link between the drones that Iran may be using right now and China. Let's turn to Pakistan for just a moment, where there has been police firing on 9, some reports say 10 pro-Iran protesters killed as they tried to storm the US consulate in Karachi. Similar attempts were made in Lahore, right? In India here, there have been appeals for peace from Omar Abdullah to the Shia population, in particular in Jammu and Kashmir. Talk about Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan has a battle on its border with Afghanistan. Pakistan is sucking up to Trump. Pakistan is trying to make good with China. It has a storm in Balochistan. And now it's going to have to take a very difficult decision, because if this is a prolonged war, its space may be used, or, the Americans may want to use it for its Iran ops. And what is Pakistan going to do?
So I would hazard a guess that Americans are already using the airspace. In fact, a base. There are items on social media which show American aircraft landing in some base called Javani, which is off in Gwadar district, and then that is being used for hitting Iran. All this while that we have been talking about my favorite field marshal, they were always gives and takes. This is how the Americans always work. They wouldn't give and take. If you want A, you give us B. So obviously there is some kind of give and take on. Of course, it is not being made public by the Pakistanis because of their own internal issues. We missed out Skardu, you see, of the Shiite populations in our subcontinent. The area of Kargil on one side and Skardu on the other side are large Shiite areas. And we have had protests. You drive across to Kargil, you've been knowing, you will see posters of Ayatollah there. There are Shiite mosques who are being funded by Iran over a vast period of time, even in the valley and in Ladakh. Skardu today had a UN office burnt out by the Shiites in Skardu, in Gilgit-Baltistan. So, the spread of the violence that can come across. And we know how Shiites, they hit themselves, and, it can be very painful moments as we see that. It will be very difficult to control the thing. That's why, look, we have been talking about 6 months ago or a little lesser, that Saudi Pakistan unbreakable deal or something, fine language they use, which is like NATO's Article 5, which says war against one will be taken as war against second. Well, what happened? Saudis were hit, yeah? Was it not a war against Pakistan? Why did they take out that treaty of Saudi and Pakistan? Is recent. I mean, the garam treaty, yeah? It's a hot treaty, it's not even old, yeah? And so the question is, Pakistan also understands this got grave internal issues. Afghanistan apart, it cannot allow those grave internal issues to highlight, because finally Iran is a Muslim nation. And that second point, the issue about the ambassador rightly pointed out, sometimes you ask yourself, is it a just war? Reckless is the word used. Was it a just war? Now, just war theories are so many, and you can always keep questioning just war, whether it is just or not, to change the regime of another government. How ruthless the regime was. Can you change the regimes like this? The otherwise is that the Americans were using the basis of these Gulf countries to sustain that same war against Iran by using, say, you see C-17s and C-130s getting all the stuff which is landed at the bases in Abu Dhabi and all that. So to say that now Iranians were striking at these bases, is it just or not just? It's an arguable thing. It can be debated both sides. Yeah, the bases are being used.
That's true, but Iran is also hitting at Dubai, which has no such bases.
UAE. Okay, take a large diameter UAE.
Okay. Fair.
And the last point is about with Afghanistan. Now see, that war is on, and that war is on for 100 odd years. Durand line, didn't start today. It started in the late 19th century. Durand line will continue like this for long times to come. It is typical of the British to make sure countries keep fighting. So Durand line will keep fighting. This is not an end to this. They will keep striking and they will be hit. The Afghanis understand the same thing which Iranians understand here. Afghanis know that they are a weak military. They are a weak party to fight against a strong military Pakistan. So they have to fight in a manner which Pakistanis can't respond. It is typical asymmetric warfare, and it is asymmetrical warfare which they have shown on the border areas, to which the Pakistanis are unable to respond. Pakistanis can hit Kandahar, they can hit Kabul, Jalalabad, but to fight a guerrilla force which has got 3-4 decades of experience is not a simple task. So that thing will continue separately here.
Okay, let me, before I give Ambassador Sinha the last word, let me get in a last thought from Colonel Itamar Yar. You agreed that Trump would not have the appetite because of domestic political reasons, the midterms coming, for a long war. You also said that the goal is not to oust a regime, but to create the space where the Iranian people who've been asking for this regime to go can do it themselves. Do you believe that the ground has been paved for that, or do you believe that that would be a long war?
Again, it depends how exactly you pronounce the word war. The operation, as I think, will take few days, perhaps a week and a half, something like that. the war, the big war, and the general had mentioned it. All these tricks didn't started yesterday and not last week and not last year. It's a battle. The Iranian regime, from the minute that the Ayatollahs became the leaders of Iran, they started the war against Israel. They used terror. They used it in many places, including in India, against Israeli targets. Please remember. So it's different kinds of war. The big operation that we see now will take days or a week or two, but the struggle between Iran and the rest of the region, it's not only against Israel. Israel is the easy target from them in terms of the public, but not in terms of the security and defense itself. But they fight. We all know, you are experts bigger than me, that the fundamental Shia Islam is not against Israel, is not against the US. It's because they would like to take control, first of all, on the Muslim world. And we didn't mention the battle between the Shia and the Sunnis, and all the other countries are Sunnis, the regime at least. And they see the main idea and the main target for them is a long mission, and it will not stop tomorrow. What we hope is that what had happened lately and what will happen in the coming days will encourage elements within the Iranian regime and within the Iranian public to take the leading position and to change the regime. Iran is a big country, is a rich country. Only one more word. You mentioned the risk that we'll have difficulty with transportation of oil during the area. I don't think that this is the case because the Iranians don't have the power and the capacities to stop ships there. The American presence there is so big and so strong that immediately when they will start to do something, the Americans will hit them and they will open it. So I don't see it as a big risk. It doesn't mean that there is no risk, that the whole operation and the environment in the region is not a risk. And I fully agree with what my colleagues have said about it.
Okay, let me give the last word to you, Ambassador Sinha. You said you met Khamenei twice. Is there something you remember from those encounters? And is there something you've understood about Iran from all your experience with it? Others have been making the point, for example, that this is the culture that believes in martyrdom. They've already issued these deeply rhetorical statements about how revenge will follow, the blood will flow and so on. And Trump has issued statements back. I hear what Colonel Itamar is saying and General Sharma is saying. This is asymmetric warfare. Nobody thinks Iran has the military capacity to take on the military might of Israel or America. But it's the elephant in the ant sort of issue, right? You can get under the skin of a huge power by simply provoking in other spaces, which is what Iran is trying to do right now. So last word to you.
Barkha, you must remember that Iran is a civilizational state. It is a country with a very rich and varied history and legacy. You may have had aberrations, you may have orthodoxy introducing some sort of extremism in their regime, but the people of Iran, and whatever, I visited that country 7 times, I've been very impressed with this, not only the level of education, the level of knowledge, but the level of understanding. Now, for people to be ruled by a theocracy like the Ayatollahs for so long, obviously there has been a reaction, and there have been vested interests who have gained from the theocracy, who want the regime to continue. But mark my words, the game isn't over yet, and it's not going to be over in a while. I agree with Colonel Itmar that they don't have the sort of weaponry that can really cause serious damage to either Israel or the United States. But certainly they have the capacity to pinprick, and I think they will do it. And they will do it unless there is the whole regime is thrown out lock, stock, and barrel, and for that you need boots on the ground, and I don't see that happening. So I think the next week is going to be crucial. The next few weeks actually are going to decide which way Iran goes. I'm not sanguine that the protesters will come up and take charge, because it's not that simple. I mean, it's a deeply divided and polarized society at present. And what the picture that we get from the Western media, in my opinion, is too rosy, too one-sided. I don't think people are going to come out on the streets and reclaim the Iran for themselves. It's not going to happen that easily. We are in for very difficult times.
Well, I think that is the bottom line. At least this next week, maybe more, are going to be very volatile. They're going to be very difficult for people across the region. They're going to be potentially unsafe. There are going to be images that are going to cause fear and anxiety from all of these countries. There is going to be the fog of war, where sometimes it's going to be impossible to understand what is true and what is false. And it is going to take time for clarity to emerge. We will leave it there. Three very distinguished people with so much expertise: General Sharma, Colonel Itamar Yar joining us from Israel today, Ambassador Sinha, who has met Khamenei, who has been an expert on Iran, been there 7 times, joining us as well. Thank you, gentlemen. And have a safe weekend, in particular to those who are in the fault lines of this battle. Colonel Yar, do take care. And to our audience, thank you. See you tomorrow.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.